Exhausted from countless battles, a single mother juggles multiple jobs to provide a decent future for her children. But on a particularly difficult day, a cry for help crosses the path of a man who never imagined he'd be there. Heir to a fortune, he sees his empty life gain new meaning upon meeting that resilient woman. Without realizing it, both embark on a journey that will forever change their destinies. If this story interests you, subscribe to the channel to receive all our exciting stories. Continuing. The sun had barely risen when Sarah was already up, preparing breakfast for her 7-year-old twins, Max and Emily. The small apartment in the suburbs of Chicago was simple but cozy, decorated with photographs and colorful drawings made by the children. While stirring the pot of oatmeal, her eyes fell on the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. Another month of bills to pay. "Mom, Emily took my notebook again." Max's voice echoed down the hallway, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. "I did not. I was just looking at his drawings," Emily replied, her dark curls bouncing as she ran to hide behind her mother. Sarah took a deep breath, serving the oatmeal in 2 colorful bowls. "Emily apologized to your brother. Max, you need to learn to share. Now come and have breakfast or we'll be late." The morning routine was a race against time. After dropping the children off at the local public school, Sarah took 2 buses to reach Aroma Cafe, where she had been working as a waitress for 3 years. The establishment was in an upscale neighborhood of the city, frequented by executives and businessmen who barely noticed her presence as she served their expensive coffees and imported croissants. "Good morning, Rose," Sarah greeted the cook as she put on her navy blue apron. Aroma Cafe was starting to fill up with the breakfast crowd, and she already knew the regular customers' orders by heart. "Sarah, honey, you've got terrible dark circles," Rose commented, preparing the first batch of bread for the day. "Are you still doing that typing work at night?" "I have to, Rose. The tutoring fees went up and the twins need new supplies for next semester," she replied, organizing the tray with orders. The day dragged on between orders, forced smiles, and aching feet. Sarah had slept only 4 hours the night before, after spending the early morning hours typing reports for an outsourcing company. Her eyes were burning, but she couldn't show fatigue. Tips were essential to make ends meet. During lunch hour, the crowd unexpectedly exploded. A business convention in a nearby building packed the cafe, and the reduced staff could barely keep up with the orders. Sarah ran between tables, balancing trays and trying to maintain her composure. "Waitress, my order is 15 minutes late." An irritated customer complained loudly. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm taking care of it right away," she responded, feeling beads of sweat trickling down her forehead. That's when everything started to spin. The accumulated fatigue, the pressure, the financial worries, it all turned into a whirlwind. The voices around her seemed distant, and her vision began to blur. The tray in her hands weighed tons. At one of the corner tables, Ethan Miller, heir to one of the country's largest construction companies, discreetly observed the scene from above his laptop. He had chosen Aroma Cafe for a meeting that had just been cancelled and was now killing time before his next appointment. His dark brown eyes noticed the exact moment when the waitress began to stagger. Sarah felt her legs weaken. The tray slipped. From her hands and plates shattered on the floor. Amidst the chaos, her voice emerged, trembling and desperate. "Please, someone help me." The cry for help echoed through the cafe, silencing conversations and freezing customers' movements. Ethan, without thinking twice, stood up from his table. Something in that plea for help struck him like lightning, awakening him from his own existential lethargy. As he walked towards the waitress, who was now leaning on a chair to avoid falling, Ethan didn't imagine that this moment would completely change the course of his life, that this simple act of extending a hand to someone in need would be the first step on a journey that would make him rediscover the true meaning of success, family, and love. Ethan firmly held Sarah by the arm, preventing her from falling. The unexpected touch made her shudder, but there was something comforting in the way he supported her. Rose ran from the kitchen with a glass of water, while other customers watched the scene, some with genuine concern, others with mere curiosity. "You need to sit down," Ethan said in a calm but firm voice, guiding her to a nearby chair. Take deep breaths. Sarah tried to protest, aware of the shards scattered on the floor and the delayed orders, but her body wouldn't respond. Exhaustion had finally taken its toll. The tables and the customer, she muttered, her hands trembling as she held the water glass. I'll take care of that, Rose intervened, already starting to clean up the mess. You need to rest, girl. The cafe manager, Mr. Thompson, approached, with hurried steps and a worried expression. Not for Sarah's health, but for the inconvenience caused to the customers. Gentlemen, I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll offer complimentary items with your orders to make up for the delay. Ethan observed the scene with a mix of indignation and fascination. The waitress was clearly on the verge of collapse, and all the manager cared about was the establishment's profits. It deeply bothered him, reminding him of the countless times he had witnessed similar situations in the corporate world. Mr. Thompson, Ethan called, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he usually used in business meetings. I believe your employee needs medical attention. I can call my personal doctor to come examine her. The manager finally seemed to notice who he was talking to. Ethan Miller was an important client, a regular at the cafe, and more significantly, one of the city's most influential businessmen. Of course, Mr. Miller, we can use my office for the examination. Sarah, still dazed, tried to stand up. It's not necessary, I just need a few minutes. Please, Ethan insisted, his eyes meeting hers. Let me help. There was something in that look that made her hesitate. It wasn't pity as she was used to receiving. It was genuine concern, mixed with something she couldn't define. Maybe understanding. While waiting for the doctor, Ethan remained by her side in the manager's office. The silence between them was punctuated only by the distant sound of conversations. In the cafe, Sarah noticed that her hands were still trembling slightly. How long has it been since you took a vacation? Ethan asked softly. Sarah let out a humorless laugh. Vacation? That's a luxury single mothers can't afford, Mr. Miller. Ethan, he corrected. Call me Ethan. He paused, studying the tired face in front of him. You have children? Twins, she replied, a slight smile appearing on her lips for the first time. Max and Emily, 7 years old, they're my whole life. Ethan felt something awaken inside him. Since his mother's passing 3 years ago, he had rarely seen genuine smiles like that. In his world of business and appearances, people smiled out of convenience, out of interest. Sarah's smile, even amidst fatigue, carried a truth that touched him deeply. The doctor arrived and, after a basic examination, confirmed what everyone already suspected: extreme exhaustion. He recommended immediate rest and a series of complementary tests. I can't miss work, Sarah protested, thinking of the bills she needed to pay. Yes, you can, Ethan intervened, turning to the manager. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Sarah will take a week of paid leave to recover. I'm sure the cafe's management understands the importance of taking care of its employees. The tone left no room for discussion. The manager just nodded, although visibly displeased. When they were finally alone again, Sarah looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Ethan reflected for a moment. Why indeed was he getting so involved? He himself didn't know how to explain it. Maybe it was the way she struggled to stay on her feet, even on the verge of collapse. Or maybe it was because for the first time in a long time, he felt he could do something truly meaningful. Sometimes, he replied, we don't need to know someone to recognize their strength. And sometimes the strongest people are precisely those who need to learn to accept help. Sarah felt her defenses begin to waver. Years of solitary struggle had taught her to distrust any offer of help. But there was something different about this man, something that intrigued her and at the same time frightened her. The school gate was busy when Sarah arrived to pick up the twins. After the incident at the cafe, she had taken advantage of the forced afternoon off to rest, and now, even though still tired, she felt a little better. Max and Emily came running towards her as soon as they spotted her, their colorful backpacks bouncing on their backs. Mum, you came earlier today, Emily exclaimed, hugging her around the waist. The teacher let me present my drawing to the whole class. And I got all the math problems right, Max added proudly, his eyes shining behind. his small glasses. Sarah smiled, feeling her heart warm. It was for moments like this that she faced all the difficulties. "That's wonderful, my loves. How about we go to the playground today? Mommy got a special day off." The children cheered, jumping with joy. The playground was a few blocks from home, and they rarely had the opportunity to go during the week. As they walked, Sarah thought about how she would explain to her children about the week off she would have ahead. Even more, she thought about the strange encounter with Ethan Miller. At the playground, sitting on a bench while watching the twins play, Sarah was surprised by a message on her cell phone. It was from an unknown number. "Good afternoon, Sarah. It's Ethan. I hope you're feeling better. I'd like to talk about a proposal. May I call?" She stared at the screen for a few seconds, surprised. How had he gotten her number? Probably through the cafe's employee records. After a few minutes of hesitation, she replied, "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. I'm with my children now. Can we talk tomorrow?" The response came almost instantly. "Of course. How about coffee? I know a great place. Very different from Aroma." Sarah couldn't help but smile ironically. "I need to find someone to stay with the kids. Bring them along. I'm sure they'll like the place. It has an incredible kids area." Before Sarah could respond, Max came running towards her. "Mom, look what I found." In his hands, a small blue feather from some bird gleamed against the sunlight. "It's beautiful, son. We'll keep it in your collection album when we get home." Sarah watched her son run back to the swing where Emily was waiting for him. The simplicity of childhood happiness made her reflect on Ethan's proposal. After a few more minutes of contemplation, she typed, "All right, tomorrow then." During dinner, a simple spaghetti dish that the children loved, Sarah observed the twins chatting animatedly about their day at school. Emily, with her outgoing personality, gestured while telling about the drawing she had made, a garden full of colorful flowers. Max, more reserved but equally enthusiastic, explained the math exercises he had solved. "Children," Sarah began, serving a bit more juice, "tomorrow we're going to visit a new place. A friend of Mommy's invited us." "A friend?" Emily asked, curious. "Like Uncle Joe from the bakery?" Sarah smiled. Joe, the neighborhood baker, was one of the few people the children knew outside of school. "No, sweetie, it's someone I met today at work. He wants to talk to Mommy about something important." "Is he nice?" Max questioned, adjusting his glasses with a characteristic gesture he made when thoughtful. "He seems to be," Sarah answered honestly. "But we'll find out together, okay?" After putting the children to bed and reading the story they always asked, For The Princess and the Frog, for the 1000th time, Sarah sat on the small balcony of the apartment. The night was pleasant, and the sounds of the city were beginning to diminish. She took out her old notebook, the one where she wrote down her dreams and projects, and began to leaf through it. Among the pages, she found sketches of what would be her own cafe, simple drawings of a cozy environment, lists of recipes she would like to serve, even a provisional name, Flower Cafe. It was a dream she had held for years, since she started working in the industry, but it always seemed impossible to achieve, especially after she became a single mother. The thought led her back to Chris, the twins' father. He had disappeared when the children were only 2 years old, leaving her with debts and a broken heart to heal. Since then, Sarah had built high walls around herself, protecting herself and her children from new disappointments. Now, for the first time in a long time, she felt these walls being challenged. Ethan's unexpected kindness, his genuine concern, stirred structures she thought were solidified. It was scary and, at the same time, strangely liberating. Looking at the stars that stubbornly shone between the buildings, Sarah allowed herself, just for a moment, to dream of possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to give a chance to something new in her life. The great place Ethan had mentioned was a charming cafe in a tree-lined neighborhood of Chicago. Unlike Aroma Cafe, with its cold and impersonal decor, this establishment had a welcoming air with rustic wooden furniture and large windows that let in natural light. Sarah observed the environment with attentive eyes, noting every detail she might one day incorporate into her own business. "Mommy, look at all the games," Emily exclaimed, pointing to the carefully set-up children's area in a corner of the cafe. It was a safe and well-planned environment, with books, educational games, and a small activity table. Ethan was already waiting for them at a table near the children's area. He was wearing more casual clothes than the day before. Although Sarah suspected his polo shirt cost more than her entire wardrobe, he stood up when he saw them, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "Welcome. You must be Emily." He bent down, slightly getting to the girl's height. "And you, Max, right?" Max, usually shy with strangers, surprised Sarah by returning the greeting with a small smile. "Are you Mom's friend she told us about?" "You can call me Ethan," he replied, pulling out chairs for everyone to sit. "And yes, I'm a new friend of your Mom's. Actually, I hope we can all be friends." A waitress approached to take their orders. Ethan insisted they choose whatever they wanted, and soon the table was filled with treats that Sarah could rarely afford for her children: special hot chocolate, homemade cakes, artisanal breads, and fresh juices. "Kids, why don't you explore the kids' area a bit while I talk?" "To your mom," Ethan suggested after the children finished their snacks. Max and Emily looked at Sarah, silently asking for permission. "You can go, but stay where I can see you," she agreed, watching her children head excitedly to the play area. Alone at the table, a brief silence settled in. Sarah noticed that Ethan seemed slightly nervous, something that contrasted with the image of the confident businessman she had met the day before. "Sarah," he began, his fingers gently drumming on the coffee cup, "since yesterday, I can't stop thinking about what happened. Not just your exhaustion, but everything it represents." She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Mr. Miller." "Ethan, I appreciate your concern, but please, let me continue," he asked gently. "You know, 3 years ago, when my mother passed away, I inherited a real estate empire that I never wanted. I've been spending my days in endless meetings, making decisions about buildings and investments that, honestly, bring me no satisfaction at all." Sarah observed him with curiosity. There was a vulnerability in his voice that caught her by surprise. "Yesterday, when I saw you almost faint, something changed. I saw someone with a real passion for what they do, even in the most difficult circumstances. And then, talking to Rose, I learned about your dream of having your own cafe." Sarah's heart raced. How did he know about that? "I have a proposal for you," Ethan continued, leaning slightly forward. "Last week, I acquired a historic building downtown. The ground floor has a perfect space for a cafe. It's been abandoned for years, but with renovation and vision," he paused significantly, "it could turn into something special." Sarah felt her throat dry up. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "A partnership. You bring the knowledge, experience, and vision. I bring the space and the initial investment. 50% for each of us." The sound of children playing seemed distant now. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her ears. It was a proposal too tempting, too frightening. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why me? You could hire the best professionals in the market." Ethan smiled, a smile different from what she had seen so far, softer, more genuine. "Because you have something that no money can buy, real passion for what you do. And also," he looked towards the children, who were laughing while putting together a puzzle together, "because I think we both need something more meaningful in our lives." Sarah followed his gaze, observing her children. Max and Emily seemed so happy, so at ease in that environment. It was the kind of place she had always dreamed of creating, a space where families could feel truly welcomed. "Can I think about it?" she asked, her mind already calculating risks and possibilities. "Of course," Ethan replied, handing her a card. "Take all the time you need, but Sarah..." He hesitated for a moment. "Sometimes the best opportunities are those that scare us the most." The rest of the afternoon passed like a dream. While the children played and Ethan told stories that made them laugh, Sarah allowed herself, for the first time in a long time, to visualize a different future. A future where her dreams didn't need to remain just on the pages of her old notebook. In the days that followed the meeting at the cafe, Sarah found herself torn between excitement and fear. Ethan's card rested on her bedside table, and she picked it up several times a day. turning it between her fingers as she weighed her decision. During her forced week off, she had time to reflect on the proposal that could completely change her life. On a particularly reflective afternoon, while tidying up the small apartment, Sarah found an old box under the bed. Inside it, she kept magazine clippings with ideas for cafe decorations, notes on special recipes, and even an old business plan she had started writing years ago before Chris left. "Mom," Emily's voice brought her back to the present. "Ethan sent a message asking if we want to go see the cafe place." Sarah frowned, confused. "What do you mean? What message?" Emily showed the tablet she used for online studies. On the screen, an email from the school. Ethan had donated new equipment for the computer room, including tablets for students who didn't have resources. Hers and Max's were among them. "Principal Johnson said it was an anonymous donation," Max added, entering the room with his own tablet, but Emily saw his name on the secretary's papers. Sarah felt a wave of conflicting emotions. On one hand, she was touched by Ethan's discreet generosity. On the other, her pride and independence protested against the idea of her children receiving favors. "So, Mom, can we go see the place?" Emily insisted, her eyes shining with expectation. "I don't know, darlings," Sarah began, but was interrupted by Max. "Please, Mom. Ethan said the building is historic and has lots of cool stories. I want to see it." Sarah observed her children carefully. In recent weeks, she had noticed subtle changes in them. Max, always so reserved, was more confident. Emily seemed more focused on her studies. The tablets weren't just gifts, they were tools that were helping in their development. "All right," she finally gave in. "I'll call him." The building was in a historic downtown area, surrounded by old constructions that told the city's story. Ethan was waiting for them at the entrance, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, as if he wanted to diminish the social distance between them. "This building was constructed in 1922, he explained as they climbed the entrance steps. "It was one of the first major commercial establishments in the city." "Wow," Max exclaimed, adjusting his glasses to better see the architectural details. "Look at these windows, Mom. They look like the ones in history books." The ground floor space was spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that, even dusty, let in plenty of natural light. Sarah felt her heart race as she visualized the possibilities. It was larger than she had imagined, with an area that could easily accommodate comfortable tables and, yes, even a kid's space, like the one in the cafe they had visited. "Here," Ethan pointed to a specific corner. "I thought about creating a reading nook. Max told me he loves books." Sarah observed the natural interaction between Ethan and the children. He answered Max's curious questions about the building's history and smiled at Emily's excited plans about how to decorate the children's space. There was no condescension in his voice, just genuine interest. "So," he asked quietly when the children moved away to explore the place, "what do you think?" "It's perfect," Sarah admitted, her voice betraying the emotion she felt. "But Ethan, it's a huge investment. What if it goes wrong?" he completed softly. "Sarah, look at your children. See how they're already involved with the idea? Sometimes we need to trust not only in our dreams, but also in the vision that others have of them." At that moment, watching Max excitedly explain to Emily about the building's architectural style, using knowledge he had certainly researched on his new tablet, Sarah felt something change inside her. Maybe it was time to let the walls she had built around herself start to crumble. "You're right," she finally said, "but we need to establish some clear rules. I don't want this to affect my children's lives if something goes wrong." "Of course," Ethan agreed, a smile lighting up his face. "We can start working on the contract tomorrow, and Sarah—" He hesitated for a moment. "Thank you for trusting me." The afternoon sun came through the dusty windows, creating patterns of light on the old wooden floor. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to dream. The sound of her children's laughter echoed through the empty space, filling it with promises of a future that, for the first time in a long time, seemed possible. The contract was signed, and the renovation of the cafe had begun. Sarah quit her job at Aroma Cafe, using her savings to support herself during the initial phase of the project. Mornings were now filled with meetings with architects, decisions about materials, and endless lists of things to do. "The original flooring can be restored," explained Amanda, the architect Ethan had hired. "It will give a special charm to the environment, maintaining the building's historic identity." Sarah ran her fingers over the old wood, feeling its imperfections. "What about the electrical installations? We need enough power for all the kitchen equipment." "That's our first problem," Amanda admitted, consulting her notes. "The wiring is very old. We'll need to redo all the electrical work, which wasn't in the initial budget." Ethan, who was observing the discussion, intervened. "How much would that affect our timeline?" "At least 3 weeks of delay and a considerable increase in the budget," the architect replied. Sarah felt her stomach sink. It was just the first of many obstacles that would arise, she knew. But before she could express her concern, Max, who was following the inspection with interest, made a surprising suggestion. "What if we used solar energy?" he asked timidly. "I read on the tablet that it helps save on electricity bills and it's better for the environment." Ethan looked at the boy with admiration. "You know, that's an excellent idea. We could install solar panels on the roof. The initial investment would be higher, but in the long run, we would save on energy and still have a sustainability differential," Sarah completed, smiling proudly at her son. The following weeks were intense. Sarah discovered a side of herself she didn't know, a businesswoman in training. She spent hours researching suppliers, comparing prices, developing the menu. Emily had appointed herself creative director of the children's space, presenting elaborate drawings of how she wanted it decorated. "Look, Mom," she exclaimed one afternoon, showing her newest project. "We can make an entire wall with a chalkboard for kids to draw on, and put colorful cushions in the reading corner," Max added, without taking his eyes off the architecture book Ethan had lent him. Sarah watched, amazed, how her children had become involved in the project. The cafe was becoming a family dream, something they were building together. Even their bedtime reading nights were now filled with stories about entrepreneurship and gastronomy. One day, while supervising the installation of the solar panels, Ethan surprised Sarah with a confession. "You know, since my mother passed away, I haven't felt so alive," he said, watching the workers. "She always said I needed to find something that made my eyes shine. I think I finally understood what she meant." Sarah felt her heart speed up slightly. It was increasingly difficult to ignore how Ethan had become a constant and comforting presence in their lives. He had lunch with them on weekends, helped Max with school research, and had even learned how to braid Emily's hair. "Your mother would be proud," she replied softly. "You're creating something meaningful." "We are," he corrected, his eyes meeting hers. "And speaking of which, I have a surprise for you." Ethan led her to a room at the back of the cafe that hadn't been renovated yet. On an old table rested a brown leather notebook. "I found an artisan who makes personalized notebooks," he explained, as Sarah flipped through the blank pages. On the cover, delicately engraved, was written, "Flower Cafe, a dream under construction." 2. "I'll replace your old notebook," he continued. "I thought we deserved a new beginning with blank pages to fill together." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. The gesture was more than a simple gift. It was a symbol of transformation. Her old notebook carried solitary dreams, born on nights of hopelessness. This new one represented shared dreams, built with support and affection. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "For everything." At that moment, a deafening noise came from the main area, followed by workers' shouts. The sound of running water echoed through the space. "The main pipe burst," someone yelled. Sarah and Ethan ran to see the damage. Water was gushing from a newly painted wall, threatening all the work already done. As they observed the chaos setting in, their hands instinctively found each other, seeking mutual support. "We'll solve this," Ethan stated with determination. "Together." Sarah squeezed his hand lightly, surprising herself with the gesture. "Together," she agreed, realizing that the word carried an increasingly deeper meaning. The water gushing from the walls of Flower Cafe revealed much more than a simple leak. After a thorough inspection, the engineers brought devastating news. The entire plumbing system of the building needed to be replaced, and there were serious structural problems that needed to be resolved before any inauguration. "We're talking about at least 2 months of delay," the chief engineer explained, showing the building plans spread out on an improvised table. "And the cost, well, it will be substantially higher than anticipated." Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. 2 months meant more time without income, more expenses, more uncertainties. Her savings were already running low, and the typing work she did in the early morning hours barely covered basic expenses. "How much?" Ethan asked, his voice maintaining the professional calm that Sarah so admired. "Something around $300,000, considering materials and specialized labor." The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah felt her hands tremble slightly, and she needed to lean against the wall to maintain her balance. It was an astronomical amount for her, who had always counted every penny to survive. "I can cover the extra costs," Ethan offered when they were alone. "We don't need to change our 50-50 partnership." "No," Sarah responded firmly. "It wouldn't be fair. You've already invested much more than I have in this project." "Sarah," he approached, his eyes revealing an intensity that made her hold her breath, "you're investing something much more valuable than money here. Your experience, your vision, your dedication, that's priceless." Before she could respond, Max and Emily came running into the space, returning from school. They stopped abruptly upon feeling the tension in the environment. "Did something happen, Mum?" Emily asked, her sharp intuition catching the concern on her mother's face. Sarah tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her. "Just some little problems with the renovation, sweetie." "Is it because of the water?" Max questioned, looking at the moisture stains on the walls. "I saw in my book that old buildings sometimes have problems like this." Ethan approached the boy, gently placing his hand on his shoulder. "Exactly, Max. But you know what else I learned from your architecture books? That the oldest buildings, when well cared for, can last for centuries. Sometimes we just need to have patience and extra care with them." Sarah observed the interaction with a heavy heart. It was amazing how Ethan always knew exactly what to say to reassure the children. In recent months, he had become such a natural presence in their lives that it was hard to remember what it was like before him. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Sarah found Ethan still at the cafe, sitting among the construction tools and materials, leafing through the leather notebook he had given her. "You didn't have to stay late," she said, sitting down beside him. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he replied simply. "I know how you worry about everything." The proximity between them was almost electric. Sarah could feel the warmth emanating from his body, the slight scent of his cologne mixed with the smell of fresh paint and wood. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a low voice, "not of the money or the delay. I'm afraid of how all of this is changing my life, our life." Ethan slowly closed the notebook, turning to face her. "And is that bad?" "No," she answered, her voice almost a whisper. "It's scary. After Chris left, I promised myself I would never depend on anyone again, that I would raise the twins alone, that I would achieve my dreams on my own, and now you're not alone," he completed, his hand finding hers on the notebook. "And that doesn't make you weaker, Sarah. On the contrary." The touch of their hands sent shivers down her spine. It was different from all the casual touches they had shared in recent months. There was a new intensity, a silent recognition of something that had been growing between them. "The twins adore you," she said, as if seeking more reasons to fear this approach. "If something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Ethan stated, with conviction. "You know why? Because I'm not here just for the cafe or for the investment. I'm here for you, for them, for the family you're allowing me to be a part of." Sarah felt silent tears run down her face. Ethan brought his free hand to her cheek, gently wiping them away with his thumb. The gesture was so intimate, so full of affection, that she felt her heart almost stop. "Don't cry," he asked softly. "Tomorrow we'll solve all of this, And the day after tomorrow, and after, for as long as you allow me to be by your side." The moment was interrupted by a noise coming from upstairs. Probably some tool forgotten by the workers had fallen, but the enchantment didn't completely break. Something had changed that night between the unfinished walls of Flower Cafe, a truth that could no longer be ignored. The news about the new cafe had come out in a local newspaper, highlighting the revitalization of the historic building and the entrepreneurship story behind the project. The photo showed Sarah and Ethan in front of the establishment under renovation, with the twins smiling beside them. This was how Chris discovered where to find his ex-family. It was a Saturday afternoon when he showed up at the cafe. Sarah was testing recipes in the experimental kitchen with Emily, while Max and Ethan organized the new collection of books for the reading space. Sarah. The familiar voice made her freeze. 5 years had passed, but that tone still had the power to paralyze her muscles. "Daddy," Emily whispered, her wide eyes fixed on the man standing at the kitchen door. Chris was different. The well-cut suit and neatly styled hair contrasted with the last image Sarah had of him, disheveled, fleeing with the family's savings in the middle of the night. His smile, however, remained the same. Calculated. "My little princess, how you've grown!" he exclaimed, opening his arms to Emily. The girl, however, hid behind her mother, unusual behavior for her normally outgoing personality. Sarah's protective instinct immediately ignited. "What do you want, Chris?" she asked, her voice firmer than she felt inside. "Can't I visit my own children?" he replied, taking a step into the kitchen. "I see you're prospering." The sound of hurried footsteps preceded Max's arrival, who had probably heard the voices. The boy stopped abruptly upon seeing his father, his glasses sliding slightly down his toes. "Champion!" Chris smiled, but his eyes studied his son with an almost clinical curiosity. "You're wearing glasses now." "For 3 years," Max replied softly, backing up until he bumped into the kitchen counter. Ethan appeared shortly after, his presence bringing a wave of security that Sarah felt physically. He didn't say anything, but his posture made clear his willingness to protect that family. "And you must be Sarah's new friend," Chris commented, his tone loaded with insinuations. "I read about you in the newspaper, the rich businessman who decided to bankroll the waitress's dream." "Mr. Chris," Ethan responded politely but firmly, "Sarah is my partner, not a waitress I'm bankrolling. And I suggest we have this conversation at another time, without the children present." Chris laughed, a humorless sound. "Now you're deciding what's best for my children. Interesting." "Children," Sarah intervened, her voice trembling slightly. "Why don't you go with Ethan to check how the book organization turned out?" "But Mom," Emily began to protest. "It's okay, Princess," Sarah assured, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "We're just going to talk for a bit." Ethan hesitated, his eyes meeting Sarah's in a silent question. She nodded slightly, and he led the children out of the kitchen, not without first gently squeezing her shoulder in support. When they were alone, the air seemed to get heavier. "So this is how it's going to be?" Chris asked, his smile disappearing. "You form a new family and completely replace me?" "You replaced yourself when you abandoned your children," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "What do you really want, Chris?" "I want my rights as a father. I want to participate in their lives, and I don't like the idea of another man taking my place." Sarah felt a wave of indignation grow in her chest. "Rights? You lost your rights when you decided to disappear for 5 years. Do you know how many nights Max cried calling for you? How many times Emily asked why her father didn't love her anymore?" "People change, Sarah. I've changed. I have a company now. I'm stable. I can give them everything I couldn't before." "They don't need your money," she replied, her voice shaking with contained emotion. "They needed your love, your time, your presence, and you chose not to give any of that." Chris moved closer, his expression hardening. "I have legal rights. I can make things very difficult for you, and for your new rich boyfriend." "You can. Try," Sarah responded, surprising him with her determination. "But I won't let you hurt our children again. They have a stable life now. They're happy." If you really changed, if you really care about them, you'll respect that. A tense silence settled between them. For the first time, Chris seemed to really see the woman in front of him, no longer the insecure young woman he had abandoned, but a strong and determined mother. "This isn't over," he said finally, turning to leave. "You'll be hearing from me." When he left, Sarah felt her legs weaken. She leaned against the kitchen counter, taking deep breaths to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She couldn't let herself break down now. Her children needed her to be strong. Ethan reappeared minutes later, alone. "The kids are with Rose. She arrived to bring some bread samples and is distracting them with stories." He approached cautiously. "Are you okay?" Sarah shook her head negatively, finally allowing herself to be vulnerable. Ethan enveloped her in his arms, and she allowed herself to cry, not out of fear or sadness, but out of anger at seeing her family's peace threatened again. "We'll face this together," he whispered into her hair. "You're not alone anymore, Sarah. Never again." The judicial notification arrived a week after Chris's visit. Sarah stared at the official envelope with a mixture of fear and determination. The twins' father was requesting a review of custody, claiming that Ethan's involvement in the children's lives was detrimental to his paternal role. "He has no legal basis," explained Ms. Harper, the lawyer Ethan had hired. "He voluntarily abandoned. The family didn't pay child support, didn't maintain contact. Moreover, the children are clearly well cared for and happy." Sarah held the cup of tea the lawyer had served her, trying to control the tremor in her hands. "But he has resources. Now, he said he has a company." "Sarah," Ms. Harper gently interrupted her, "no judge is going to prioritize money over emotional stability. Your children have a routine, they're doing well in school, they have a healthy family environment. That's what matters." The lawyer's office was welcoming, with plants in the windows and a decor that more resembled a living room than a formal office. Ethan was sitting next to Sarah, his silent presence offering the support she so desperately needed. "And what about the allegations? About my relationship with the children?" Ethan asked, his voice betraying a concern he rarely showed. "They're unfounded," the lawyer replied firmly. "You've built a healthy and gradual relationship. The children weren't forced into anything." "In fact," she smiled slightly, "I received something interesting this morning." Ms. Harper opened a folder and pulled out 2 colorful drawings. The first, made by Emily, showed 5 people: herself, Max, Sarah, Ethan, and Rose, all smiling in front of a building that clearly represented Flower Cafe. At the top, in childish handwriting, was written, "My family." The second was a text, carefully written by Max, describing how Ethan had helped him overcome his fear of school presentations, how he always answered his questions about architecture, and how he made his mother smile like in the old photos. The children delivered this to the school office, Ms. Harper explained. The school counselor was so touched that she made a detailed report on the positive development of both of them in recent months. Sarah felt silent tears roll down her face as she looked at the drawings. Ethan intertwined his fingers with hers, and she allowed herself to rest her head on his shoulder. "We're going to fight with everything we've got," the lawyer assured, "and, from my experience, we're going to win." In the weeks that followed, Sarah divided her time between court hearings and finalizing the cafe. The renovation was almost complete, and the opening date was approaching. The structural problems had been resolved, and the space was starting to come to life. On a particularly difficult night, after a tense mediation session with Chris, Sarah found Ethan at the cafe organizing the last equipment deliveries. "Are the kids asleep?" he asked, noticing her deep, dark circles. "Yes, Rose stayed with them," she replied, sitting down in one of the new wooden chairs. "Max had a nightmare again." Ethan stopped what he was doing and approached. "Do you want to talk about it?" "He dreamed that his father was taking him away," Sarah said, her voice choked. "He woke up crying, saying he didn't want to go, that he wanted to stay with us." "Come here." Ethan pulled her into his arms, and she let herself be enveloped by the familiar embrace that had become her safe haven. No one is going to separate this family. How can you be so sure? She asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Ethan pulled away slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. Because some bonds are stronger than papers or blood. They're built with love, trust, and daily choices. He paused as if gathering courage for something. Sarah, I love you. I love our children. Yes, ours, because that's how I see them, and nothing Chris does is going to change that. Sarah's heart stopped for a moment. It was the first time he had said those words, although she had felt them for a while. I love you too, she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper, and I'm so afraid of that. Don't be, he smiled, wiping away a tear that was rolling down her face. You know what Max told me the other day? That he finally understood what real family means. That it's not just who made you, but who chooses to stay. Sarah felt her heart fill with a love so big it could barely fit in her chest. There, among still-wrapped cups and plastic-covered furniture, she finally understood that some battles are worth fighting. That some loves are strong enough to heal old wounds and build new beginnings. We're going to open this cafe, she said with renewed determination. We're going to show Chris and the world that we've built something beautiful here. Something real. Ethan kissed her softly, a kiss that carried promises of the future. Outside, the city lights shone like stars, silently witnessing the moment when two hearts decided, definitively, to face any storm together. The final hearing was scheduled for the same week as the opening of Flower Cafe. Sarah watched the final preparations with a mixture of anxiety and hope. The space had transformed exactly as she had dreamed, welcoming, elegant, and full of life. The walls, once stained and deteriorated, now displayed a soft shade of sea green, decorated with black and white photographs of the old city. The reading corner, Max's special project, was perfect. Rustic wooden shelves housed carefully selected books, and comfortable armchairs invited reading. The kids' space, idealized by Emily, had become a small work of art, with an entire chalkboard wall already covered with the girls' first drawings. Mommy, Emily called, running from the kitchen with an apron too small for her. Rose said I can help make the cookies for tomorrow. Just don't eat all the dough before baking, Sarah joked, adjusting her daughter's apron. Max, who was organizing the books on the shelves for the 10th time, looked up from his task. Mom, do you think after tomorrow we'll still be able to come here every day? The question made Sarah's heart tighten. The hearing with Chris loomed like a shadow over the joy of recent achievements. Before she could answer, Ethan entered carrying a large package. Of course you'll be able to come, he answered with conviction. This place is as much yours as it is ours, and look what just arrived. Inside the package was the cafe's official sign, a delicate arrangement of metal and glass, where hand-painted flowers framed the name Flower Cafe. Below, in smaller letters, founded by Sarah Thompson and Ethan Miller, 2025. It's beautiful, Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining. Just like the drawing you made, Ethan smiled, affectionately messing up the girl's hair. On the morning of the hearing, the cafe was practically ready for the opening that would happen the next day. Sarah carefully adjusted the children's clothes, trying to stay calm for them. Max couldn't stop adjusting the bow tie he had insisted on wearing, while Emily compulsively smoothed the ruffles of her blue dress. At the courthouse, Chris was already waiting with his lawyer. He was impeccably dressed as always, but something in his posture seemed different. When the children entered the room, his eyes fixed on them with an expression that Sarah couldn't decipher. The judge, a middle-aged woman with kind but firm eyes, began by calling Max and Emily for a conversation in her chambers. The minutes that followed seemed eternal. Sarah held Ethan's hand so tightly that her fingers were white. When the children returned, Max had slightly red eyes, but maintained the upright posture that so much resembled Ethan. Emily, surprisingly, went straight to Chris. Dad, she said, her voice small but clear. I kept all the drawings I made for you these years. If you want, you can come see them at the cafe tomorrow. There's a special place there that I helped make. Chris's face contorted with contained emotion. For the first time since his return, the mask of arrogance fell completely. I'd love that, Princess. The judge observed the scene carefully before giving her final ruling. Custody would remain entirely with Sarah, but Chris would have the right to supervised visits, starting with meetings at Flower Cafe, a neutral and familiar environment for the children. And as for Mr. Miller, the judge added, I consider his presence in the children's lives as a positive factor of stability and affection. There is no legal basis to restrict this interaction. After the hearing, to everyone's surprise, Chris asked to speak with Sarah and Ethan privately. I was wrong, he admitted, running his hand over his tired face. When I saw that news report, when I saw how happy they were, I felt envious, angry. But today, seeing how Max carries himself, how confident Emily is, I realized that you gave them everything I couldn't, or didn't want to give. Sarah felt Ethan gently squeeze her hand in support. I don't want to be the villain in their story, Chris continued. If you'll allow it, I'd like to try to be just a father who's trying to fix his mistakes. The opening of Flower Cafe the next day was more than the realization of a professional dream. It was the celebration of a family that was built through love, trust, and the courage to start over. The space was packed. Rose commanded the kitchen with mastery, while Emily proudly showed everyone her art corner. Max conducted mini-tours, explaining the history of the building, his words echoing the knowledge shared with Ethan during the renovation. In a quiet moment, Sarah found Ethan observing the scene from the upper balcony. The late afternoon sun came through the restored windows, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor. You know what I love most about this place? She asked, leaning against him. It's not the walls or the decor or even Rose's perfect coffee. It's the story we built here, our story. Ethan wrapped her in his arms, softly kissing her forehead. And this story is just beginning. Downstairs, Max was animatedly explaining to Chris the architectural details of the building, while Emily was drawing another flower on the chalkboard. Rose was coming out of the kitchen with a tray of freshly baked cookies, filling the air with a cozy aroma of cinnamon and vanilla. Flower Cafe had become more than a commercial establishment. It was a testament to how love can transform empty spaces into homes, strangers into family, and dreams into reality. The flowers that Sarah had always imagined in her old notebook now bloomed not only on the walls and in the cafe's name, but in her children's smiles, in Ethan's love, and in the certainty that some new beginnings are in fact the true destiny that had always been waiting for us.